Welcome to the InfoMullet YouTube channel. If you enjoy this content, please like or share. And if you'd like to support the InfoMullet by becoming a mulleteer, visit us on Patreon. We appreciate your support. Well, I think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to Saturday Night Special, Coronavirus Ask Me with the InfoMullet. My name is Timothy Clancy. I'm your chief mulleteer, as you know by now. Tonight, it's going to be a somewhat limited schedule. We did an hour and 45 minutes on Wednesday. We'll probably do a little bit less than that. We've got a lot of topics to go through. That the first 20 to 30 minutes will probably be about media literacy, some updates with things that people have been asking throughout the week. Then we'll switch it to Ask Me Anything. As always, feel free to ask questions through. I'll be able to go back and look and kind of go back and check as the question. So again, first part will be updates on a few topics I've selected. If you go in the discussion, see the topics as well as the links I'll be referring to. As always, if you enjoy and support what we do to bring more to the news or more masks for Bonky, www.patreon.com/infomullet. It's $5 a month to be a mulleteer. We appreciate all the support we get. And with that, we're going to go ahead and get started. So on Wednesday, we did an update of Wave 1 for the United States. And I think obviously a lot of the attention has been on the United States. Those of us living in it, we have now over 500,000 confirmed cases. Probably estimates by our calculated as many millions of people are actually infected. Death rate continues to climb, and I'm going to go through that. But I think it's important. A lot of these things that we talk about, people are acting as if the United States was an isolated, abstract thing you could argue. And a lot of the time I see sort of these confusions and questions come out, it's arguing in the abstract as if this wasn't happening anywhere else in the world. And I've spent some time earlier in past Ask Me Anythings to go over places like Europe, Western Europe, East Asia, Oceania. What I wanted to do today is go over a specific group of countries I'm calling uneloquently the NUBBIER-7, NUBBIER, and that stands for Nigeria, Ukraine, Bangladesh, Brazil, India, Egypt, and Russia. These 7 countries are all likely not only to exceed the United States in cases, but potentially exceed us in deaths as well. And it's there's a few things these countries have in common, and I had put some charts up that showed sort of where they were at. We won't be able to show those because I'm going through Facebook Live and not Zoom like I had planned. Zoom decided to update itself. But these NUBBIER-7 countries, they are all, first of all, they all practice business as usual. And if you discuss the national responses, business as usual is where you try to ignore the effects of the virus and don't go into a fire block or a mobilization and lockdown or that early. They also, in some cases, suppressed information, and we think perhaps monkeyed around with the numbers. Russia specifically had a very unusual behavior pattern for a long time that didn't make sense. Bangladesh was reclassifying cases as atypical pneumonia and not having the deaths. But at a deeper level, countries tend to be led by sort of populist, sometimes authoritarian, often authoritarian regimes, and they don't exactly have conditions that allow themselves to be well enabled to the kinds of measures we're seeing that are successful in Western Europe, South Asia, East Asia, and North America. What I mean by sustained mobilization and lockdown. So just to go through these, NUBBIER, Nigeria. We got a question on Wednesday, is this hitting Africa? It is absolutely hitting Africa. And Nigeria is the most populous country in Africa, probably 200 million people, and it is starting to struggle. The official numbers aren't that bad yet, but as I mentioned last Wednesday, that's probably because they can't afford testing infrastructure that other countries are benefiting from. And so we're not seeing a lot of cases in Nigeria yet, a few hundred, a couple dozen deaths, but in neighboring Nigeria, we are seeing a outbreak, and we know this is moving through Africa now. So with its large size, its tough infrastructure, economically, it's had a little bit of a boom years recently. It still suffers from a lot of the basic institutions, types of responses that you'd want to see deal with a major pandemic like this. Ukraine, the NUBBIER-7, in Eastern Europe, it's a lot of the Eastern European countries lagged Western, about 3 to 4 weeks behind where, say, France and Spain and Italy were. But they're seeing it now. And Ukraine, obviously, some of an ongoing insurgency in the Donbass region. It's under conditions and circumstances as a sort of feeling, still kind of struggling with the financial fallout of the the recent uprisings and removal of the Russian influence, and then the ongoing insurgency. The country's still basically split in half. Mobilization, lockdowns, social distancing, all of these things are going to be challenged when you're working in an environment that is a limited or low-level conflict. The first B in Nubbie stands for Bangladesh. And those who know, we have a lot of followers. We do a lot of work on Bangladesh. Earlier in the week, I posted a chart of Bangladesh that said it was probably about 5 to 8, but we believe that was low because the number of deaths were being artificially suppressed. They just weren't being reported correctly. And sure enough, today when I went and looked, pulled it, the deaths have now rapidly increased. It looks like a batch of deaths have now been reclassified as COVID. And the latest updates for Bangladesh is between 30 and 50,000 people actual infected. Now, that doesn't sound much compared to the U.S. with 500,000 confirmed, but keep in mind with Bangladesh, they don't have access to the kind of tests. Even as though our tests are we're not testing enough, Bangladesh really doesn't have the means for widespread testing. And the healthcare infrastructure there is much weaker than in other states. And the conditions is a country of 180 million people. The conditions are very close together. It's going to be very difficult to maintain social distancing. The second B, Brazil. President Bolsonaro, a populist leader, like many populist leaders, he could kind of talk his way out of this, use a cult of personality, and sort of do business as usual, even to the point of not really enforcing any social distancing, even as Brazil began an early outbreak. So if Eastern Europe was 3 to 4 weeks behind the U.S., South America and Europe, South America is probably closer to 5 to 6. About the same, a little bit slower. You're seeing outbreaks in Argentina, Ecuador, and Brazil, but Brazil especially is really growing fast. They have close to 100,000 cases now in some of our actual projections. And you talk about the favelas there, the large cities, the heavy crowding, and a government that still this weekend isn't on board. President Bolsonaro is probably where Trump was back in February. He still does not think this is a serious issue. And that's going to cause a pain for Brazil. It's another large populous country. India, the I in NUBBIER, the NUBBIER-7, had 1.2 billion people. For a long time, they reported a few numbers, but in South Asia, only Pakistan was reporting what I call honest numbers. And India has now seen a surge of cases and surge of deaths. And it looks like there's an outbreak underway. And the problem with India is they did institute mobilization and lockdown. It was about a week to a week and a half ago. But the economy in India is such that the day laborers and the migrant laborers, they're moving back and forth. They rely on that work and the ability to move to put food in their mouths. And it's becoming a really tense situation, more so than, say, in other countries, where you may see domestic instability as the quarantine procedures. And that's going to make it hard to enforce it. And, they're talking now about lifting these mobilization and lockdown in a week. So they put it in place a week and a half ago. They're talking about lifting it in a week. We know that's not going to work. So my fear is with India is you're going to have a very large outbreak. And again, the theory that this is sort of immune to high temperatures or humidity, anyone's ever been to India, they'll tell you it's pretty high temperatures and humidity, so that's not help them. And I think there's going to be a real challenge. Now, India has better healthcare infrastructure to some degree than Bangladesh, but it's still at 1.2 billion people. That's a lot of people. And that's a lot of large metropolitan New York City style, New Delhi, Mumbai. These dense urban cities are going to be very tough to manage. They may have multiple New York cities in probably late April, a little bit further behind, but it may be a little sooner. And the last, in Egypt, authoritarian regime, we don't really have good data of what's going there, but we are sensing now there are some outbreaks. They had a lot of travel and cruise lines that were going back and forth as this was breaking out. And President Sisi refused to do some of the measures and has sort of spent more time suppressing reporters and people trying to activate on this. It reminds me a lot happened in Iran originally. Iran tried to suppress information. It didn't work out for them. They had a major outbreak. And finally, Russia, who I've already mentioned is sort of like Ukraine and other countries in Europe, is going through an outbreak. So these are the NUBBIER-7. These are the countries that I think we're going to need to keep an eye on, global perspective, even as wave rests and maybe peaks in May, June for Western Europe, Northern Europe, Southern Europe, East Asia. You're going to see in South Asia, Eastern Europe, South America, and parts of Africa, these NUBBIER-7 could be the major story where this goes in the next couple. So a question that I got, Jennifer Dotson, she left a question on the event about food banks in the U.S. and also food security and food access. And I wanted to go over, because we haven't really touched on this. We've touched about economic issues. But I think in the U.S., food security and food access is usually the backfill food bank network. And these are obviously where people provide donations and folks can go to get their food. And that's always a backstop for areas of unemployment. Well, if you think about the COVID pandemic being like a black swan cannonballing into a pond, right? A black swan is an unusual, statistically rare event. And it does cannonball in a pond, it's going to create these ripple waves. And those ripple and waves are going to take time to reach certain spots. So if you think about it, the first thing we saw was all the states shut down. It was the first ripple in the pond. And as that went along, the economic hardship where we now have 16 million people out of work in the last 3 weeks and companies closing and struggling. The next ripple of that wave is 16 million people. A large amount of them don't have the savings. In the U.S., I think 41% do not have savings sufficient to weather a 3-month crisis. They're going to need food. And what's going to create this is these sort of the shockwave effect of everyone hitting at the same time is creating the same sort of anxieties we see to a larger degree about toilet paper and ammo. The fear is if I don't go now, there won't be any left when I get there. And that the real need of this lack of safety net or lack buffer to fall back upon has meant there's a crushing surge on food banks. Now, some of the pictures that are being shared, one of Jennifer's questions is there potentially a new vector of contagion? Not only is it serious for food purposes, but is this an area where you can't assistance, people are going to be going in the food? A lot of the pictures that have come out on the media are about the miles of car lines. Well, that's actually a consequence of the social distancing measures that the food banks have put in place. Because remember, the food banks themselves have suffered from people are donating food. Some of the volunteers are able because they're sick, don't want to come in. They're keeping people at home and essential staff only, so their distribution is more limited. Only taking people through sort of a drive-through approach to spread. So in some ways, those car lines are evidence of good social distancing. Now, in some states, the National Guard has stepped. So in Washington and a couple other states, the National Guard is now being deployed to help food banks, hands and feet for distribution. Seeing uniform keeps people a little calmer. But I think the problem is Jennifer asked some follow-ups about small businesses and this sort of unemployment in food banks. The PPP is the Payroll Protection Act and the Emergency Disaster. These new vehicles that were supposed to help small businesses keep employees on their payroll. And the question is anyone getting the money for that will keep people employed, or are we going to see this problem snowball? I have been in applications myself for those. I'm a small business owner, small consulting firm, and I can tell you there is no progress in it. We've gotten some applications in, and it's working its way through the system, but no one, I think, is getting money yet. And I don't think anyone's going to get money for several weeks. So this problem of effect of businesses having to lay off employees, unemployees going and signing up for unemployment benefits, realizing they need to get food, the fear of this is a pandemic with that normal anxiety of stockpiling, I need to get my life, is going to create continuing situations of both scarcity and large congestion at food banks. And obviously, everyone's thinking about, okay, I keep the restaurants employed by doing delivery takeout, I got to do my mask at home and my Zoom social. And I haven't heard a discussion about supporting the food banks. And it's one of those that everyone is thinking about different things. It is going to be something that we're going to need as a country and also as a government help, because these are the distribution nodes that keep people getting that food. And I don't think it's as much as a risk, because largely these are done by car now, and people are doing trips for other folks. If people don't have car access, it's another issue, but it's a secondary issue. The big thing is making sure the food and the hands and feet to deliver it are sort of surged in areas so that they can handle this. I don't think, again, ultimately there's going to be a food shortage. To the extent people have seen toilet paper shortages, and those are actually resolved now. Some places still have them. But it's going to be a continuing issue, and it's just another thing that we need to keep an eye on. So media literacy. Media literacies I want to go through here, and then we'll get to Q&A. The big one is, how should we evaluate hydrochloroquine, or however you pronounce it? This is the big question, right? Hydrochloroquine is the medicine that's touted by President Trump. It's being broadcast sort of a cure for coronavirus, a treatment for coronavirus, and there's a lot of questions. So I did some research, and there's some links in there. I wanted to go through from a media literacy standpoint to give people kind of the straight dope. First of all, in any of these discussions, it's important to discuss between treatment and prophylactic. Prophylactic means it keeps you from getting coronavirus. Treatment is once you have coronavirus, it may help in certain cases. There is zero discussion, evidence, support, or belief right now that hydrochloroquine can help keep you from getting COVID. Everything that I'm going to talk about is a limited space of treatment if you already have COVID-19. So that's very important to begin with. First of all, there is nothing that says it will, there's some studies to test it, but nothing we're going to talk about has to do with preventing you from getting it. What there are in the realm of treatment is there's been 3 studies, and I wanted to go through these because everyone talks about studies and everyone but I wanted to lay it out for you. The first study that probably got the most notice was a laboratory study in the lab. They had little petri dishes, they had coronavirus cells in the petri dish, and they found that this medicine, it's used for malaria, it's used for lupus and things like that, in the petri dish, in the lab conditions, did block transfer between some cells. You got to put that in context. That your body's not a petri dish. It's not under lab conditions, and very rarely do things that work well in the petri dish always work so well in the human body. So though that's an exploratory result, it's not really indicative of a final, even though it sounds very scientific and lots of lab, you got to understand the context. It's not in a human body. After that, there were 2 small studies, one in China, one in France, that showed some benefit in treatment. However, the French study has since been discredited. It's had a lot of controversy, and neither had a control group. This is the challenge with, these sort of cure-all, miracle cure people are tossing around. If 95% of the people who get symptoms are going to become better anyway, that's the average statistic, I could give 100 people a bucket of crispy KFC, and probably 90 of them might get better, right? You need a control group where you can say this group got the placebo and this group got the treatment, and they were statistically similar in all other ways, and then randomly isolate that and make sure you're getting good results. Neither the China or the France study had that. There has been one control study in France subsequently that showed benefits for treating mild cases, mild only, no benefits for severe, no benefits for critical, and that was a small study, had about 62. There is a nationwide study that has started now in the US. It's beginning April 2nd. That's designed to 500 people. That's a little bit larger size. It's supposed to be controlled, random control study, good power, all that goodness, but it's going to take a while. And I think we need to be very cautious because I've watched this coronavirus now since January. I've seen these miracle cures kind of come and go. There's one in China early that was an HIV treatment, and that got a lot of attention. And the reason why things get the attention they did is that obviously everyone's scared about it. Everyone's looking for an answer. It's kind of that bargaining thing. But we need to be careful that we don't really know if it has any efficacy for what we're saying it's going to do. And there are side effects. I mean, yes, it's treated for malaria, and it's been around for a long time. But that is part of that is we know that there are certain underlying conditions and medications it doesn't work well with. This isn't something you just go to a CVS and pick off the shelf. So there are potential side effects if people start using it. Specifically, none of the tests yet have dealt with very severe or critical cases where there's failure and the body's beginning to shut down. And the underlying conditions that have caused problems with hydrochloroquine in the past could be similar to what happens when the body starts to shut down and are critical. So why people believe this? Well, there's 2 cognitive effects that are at play here that are important for media literacy. One is called the illusory truth effect or validity effect, and that's the more you repeat something, the more people tend to believe it. The more you repeat something, the more people tend to believe it. The more you repeat something, I should have said that Patreon, right? Just by the fact that every day or every couple of days, President Trump goes out and talks about this, and all his advisors and supporters are talking about it, it creates a lot of attention. And people go, well, I've heard about it. I haven't heard about those other medicines. It's really no better than any other medicine we're looking now, at least from a study standpoint. People will also say things like, well, I hear doctors are taking it. Well, the reason we use a scientific method and randomly controlled trials is we don't trust individual doctors when it comes to determining if a medicine works or not. Of course, a doctor is going to use everything that they think might work to help a patient. They're trying to help. But we need to be very careful as a society not to follow rumors that say, hey, I heard the doctors are using it. That must mean it's good. doctors don't always know what the true effects are on a widespread. That's why we have this process of shifting medicine. And the final emotive effect is an appeal to emotion. You'll see this pretty much more in the fringe. The hydrochloroquine issue is beginning to fall into our red versus blue culture war, and that's partially because of what President Trump advocates are supporting it. A lot of the scientists are being probably aligned with the blue, which is probably unfair. Just because they're scientists doesn't mean they're liberal, but they're using evidence, so maybe that's something. But when you see articles, really watch out for articles that are appealing to you on an emotional standpoint. And what I mean by that is I see a lot of these rumor mills articles are like, hey, are you a free thinker? Are you not one sheep? Or do you want to get the inside scoop? Truth doesn't need to be dressed up to be taken out to the ball, right? Truth can go as it is. What you dress up with these emotive appeals is something that on its core argument doesn't work as well. So anytime, and this applies for the red or the blue, anytime you see someone appealing to you as a person with emotional appeals, be very cautious about how you take information, especially it comes to what you're putting in your body. Again, top line number. There is no whatsoever that hydrochloroquine can prevent coronavirus. So anyone who doesn't have it, that is even thinking about it, there's no evidence it's going to help you keep from getting. There were 4 studies. One was in a lab and a petri dish, so that's limited, but it showed promise for treatment. 2 were random controls, and 1 was discredited. 1 was a small sample group of 62 people that showed benefit for mild cases. The last study, we won't know for a month. So I'm going to pause here. We've got some more media literacies. I'm going to catch up with people here. Wow, there's a lot of conversation. Good to see you, Mike, John, Jennifer, Christine, Rafat, John, good to see you. Derek, Paul, I see some people are having trouble following. That may be Facebook. I'm not able to use it today. Derek, Paul, Lisa, good to see you. Yep, Bonkies with a mask, Sinead, Bob, Guy. Sorry for folks that aren't seeing this well. We'll put an update on YouTube if you're. Claire joined. Good to see you. Melissa joined. Good to see you. I'm seeing people are having problems. Some people have problems, so we'll see if we can the replay. I apologize for anyone who's having problems hearing it. For those who don't know, this is Bonky, the emotional support donkey. He is the host of the Info and Sidekick. So, Brian, good to see you. Hopefully, folks can follow along as best they can. Again, Zoom not working when I started. I had to go through Facebook Live, so I will download this and record it to YouTube, and hopefully it'll make sense. The next media literacy is COVID-19, any worse, any other common cause of death like cancer or heart attack are over-reporting. This is a concern that from a media literacy, the next few are kind of I'll deal with quickly here. This concern of like, well, the deaths are just exaggerated. There's a graphic on one of the links. It's a doctor. It's one of the links in the discussion here that Dr. Analev. What she did is she showed the deaths per day that showed the top 15 leading causes of death in the United States and how they were. It's an average, statistical average. So she took the death per year and put them out per day, and then showed how the coronavirus was increasing in deaths per day and sort of exceeding that. I apologize for those who are not able to catch up on this. Hopefully it's coming through to some. And what it showed in the graphic was that the deaths per day, as coronavirus accelerating, it began increasing up past the common causes of death. And as of April 8th, coronavirus was now the leading cause of death per day. So it had exceeded the flu, exceeded accidents, it had exceeded cancer, it had exceeded heart attack. It was now at the top at 700 deaths per day. And it's now, actually, that was on the 8th. When you look at it, we're right now close to 3,000 deaths per day. And what that means is this question of are we reporting it? Are we perhaps seeing other numbers? Coronavirus now is more lethal per day than the next top two factors combined. And I think it's hard to say, of course, with crisis going on and what's going on in New York and the challenge they're having, there's going to be some misreporting. But I don't think it's statistically significant because it's going to be underreporting of deaths in some cases, overreporting others. It's probably a wash. To argue that it's so overreported, we would have to take all the deaths from the top two things and combine them to get above what we're now with coronavirus. And again, that would mean that we aren't seeing any other case. We're still seeing deaths in those areas. So I think one of these media literacy things is you have to check these allegations against the current data. And part of it is that it's easy to say at a time from 3 weeks ago, well, coronavirus isn't bad, but as a dynamic thing that's changing, it's doubling. We're now up to 18,000 deaths, right? And that's mostly in the last 2.5 weeks. So this is accelerating the death rate. And that means it is becoming more lethal per day than just about any other thing. Now, we hope it crests and breaks in late April and May. It doesn't continue like this forever, obviously, or it won't be the top leading cause of mortality in 2020, but it will certainly be the leading cause of mortality in April and May. And that's when this wave is hitting us. So I think it's really important to understand the deaths aren't spread out over a year. They're not distributed. It's all happening in April and May. Here, another question from MediaLiteracy, and then I'll get to some of the questions from the audience here. Why is it the flu cases fell off just as COVID-19 cases were beginning to rise? Isn't that suspicious? Again, from a media literacy standpoint, there's a concept that if we can bargain the reality of the deaths away, we'll either expose it as a fraud or it won't really be bad, or we can lift the quarantine and isolation. I went and looked on the CDC. I had a chart. I can't share it because I'm on Zoom. I'm not on Zoom. And the chart shows that over the last 2 or 3 decades, the peak where the flu season peaked per month, the month the most flu cases were, and the top month was in February, the second month was in January, and the third highest month was in March. That means over the last 20, 30 years, the flu season would peak most often in February, January, and March. Not a single time did April show a peak. What that means is that the seasonal flu pattern in the United States is to peak between January and March and then decline. So that we're seeing that doesn't mean anyone's monkeying number or it's suspicious to COVID. It's doing what it always does. And this is something I brought up with the explanatory truth fragments. If you just take the fragment of, isn't it suspicious that flu cases are falling off as COVID cases rise, that may sound plausible. But if you compare it against the number of the flu, we know what the flu does. And every year it does the same thing. And every year it starts to decline as we get into late March, early April, which is where we are. So I don't put much credence in that report. Wave update, I'm going to for later, I think, because people's problems with the internet connection and I can't show the graph. All I would say on this is we have been concerned that U.S. prisons would become reservoirs. And these reservoirs would become infection bases that could not only really hurt a vulnerable population that is sort of in cramped conditions and able to get out or socially isolated and unable to access medicine as well, but these reservoirs in China found prisons was a primary source of infection from these prisons along with hospitals. So I did some looking in New York City alone. 850 prison staff and guards are now infected. In Chicago, over 450. These are numbers that were enough to shut down Washington State. Right? If we think way back into early March, Washington State was shut down with numbers less than this. And these are just in prisons in 2 major cities. There's been riots in Kansas and Washington. You can call them riots or protests, take your pick. And security incident in Louisiana. The prisons are a danger place. They didn't, you have so prisoners in there, many of whom are awaiting trial, not necessarily convicted yet. These conditions are ripe for a massive contagion and outbreak. And so you're seeing a lot of strain where guards get sick. They're not provide as much security. The prisoners know what's going on. It's not that they're unaware. So they're getting very restive when they hear sickness and illness and the inability to do anything about it. These conditions are going to continue to lead, I think, to protests, riots within prisons unless something is done to sort of manage this case. And if we don't do something quickly, we're going to have a lot of our cases in prisons going through the prison population. The last thing before I get to the Ask Me Anything, and that because I see a lot of questions, so people apparently are hearing me enough, and hopefully, The topics: what does a mild case look like? What's COVID-19? We talk about all these severe and critical cases. The worst case, people want to know, what does a mild case look like? Well, you're looking at one. I am actually presumptive positive, I guess would be the word, for COVID. Wasn't my intention, but actually, if you go back to the Wednesday Ask Me Anything, I was actually nauseous the whole time I was doing that, to the point where I was ready to connect if I was going to throw up live on Facebook. And that was very sudden and unexpected on Wednesday. I slept from Wednesday night, 4 p.m., 16 hours just about, just getting up to go to the bathroom, get water. I had a nausea wave again on Thursday, almost the exact same time. And that's when I started calling people and notifying them. And 20 minutes later, I got a call from my sister. She's an infectious disease specialist in Alaska. And she runs me through the symptoms. What are your symptoms? I tell her what they are. And she goes, yeah, you've got it. It's diagnosis. I don't want to get her license pulled. She's not doing medicine over the phone. But, she lives in this world. And it's kind of, I'm telling you this, sort of share that it's a two-edged thing. One, I obviously got the disease. I didn't take enough precautions, but I took quite a few precautions, and it still happened. The second is, it's not anything you want to have, even on the mild case. I've stopped doing the articles. You'll see less active on Facebook. I'm making videos and trying to keep up with these twice a week. It takes a lot out of you. There's a tremendous amount of fatigue that goes along with this, along with nausea, diarrhea, headache, dizziness, shortness of breath, all these things. And I started picking up this cough yesterday, which I'm having now. Why I'm not coughing right now. Again, it's not that I'm on door. It's a mild case. I'm going to be fine. But you really don't want to have. So if you can avoid getting it, and you've been wondering, well, I haven't seen anyone with a coronavirus case yet. Why should I be? I am the person that you can see now as this, and it's really, it's put a big setback on what I'm doing, because right now I do much of anything. And again, some ground rules of things of, I don't discuss my family situation because of my work. I don't discuss where I am. I appreciate any inquiries or things like that. I've got people who are checking in and doing all that good stuff, so I'm good. But I don't have the ability to respond to a bunch of messages. So if you didn't already know before today and you have any concerns or questions, I appreciate them, but I'll probably be limited in how I answer, other than like. Now I'm going to start. So that mild case, I'm going to start going through and taking some of the questions. This will involve. Well, let me see first if there's any questions on the. Yeah, Mike, not a fever. Actually, the one thing I don't have is a fever. My temperature stays low. I feel so. The way I could tell that something was wrong is I was very nauseous on Wednesday. Didn't throw up because I was live with you. It happened again on Thursday at nearly the same. And between that, I felt like I was hit with I felt like someone had taken their elbows and leaned into my eyeballs, and my intestine felt really, really sore. And that is actually more common than fever and cough. To my sister, she says cough actually comes later. We're all worried about coughs. If you don't have nausea and a sudden wave of fatigue and just feel like a punching bag, probably okay. I mean, obviously pay attention. Things like the cough, fever, those come later. I've got the cough a little bit now. I don't have fever yet. My temperature stays normal, and I'm taking it every 4 hours. So everyone's different. Mine's probably a mild case. I'm in pretty good shape. I have no underlying conditions. I'm not too worried about it. But so let's hear other questions. Let's go through the questions. Okay, questions, comments about the food. I'm still in the paper round. Yep. Yeah, French study control was laughable. Going questions now. Here we go. John, so how much talk yet about nationwide randomized testing? Yeah, this is a challenge of now doing what diagnostic testing. So the diagnostic is simply people who have symptoms that are going into hospitals and sort of getting tested as they're showing symptoms. I am not going to get a test. I don't have significant. I'm not going to any hospital or anything like that. I'm not going to get a test. So now our daily testing is sort of diverging into this sort of diagnostic. What John is asking about is the sort of surveillance testing. About Lucas Hill, who does this for a living, estimated we need 750 tests a day to be able to do probabilistic testing, and probably somewhere between 100 to 200 right now. It bounces back. So we are way short of the number before we can get to a surveillance level. Ken, what are your thoughts on the optimism of vaccine by September, given what is typically involved in coming up with a vaccine? So Ken's got a question here, a report that came out that we may see. So since the beginning in February, the standard answer has been 8 months to a vaccine from February, and that is because there were a lot of getting a vaccine is not just getting in the lab and getting it work together. Doing safety trials, it's doing human studies, it's doing widespread random control, all these things, and those take time. Those are in place because of regulation and law through the FDA and other regulatory bodies, and each country has different ones. That generates a lot of time. As you start waiving some of those laws, you might bring that timeline in. And I think what we're seeing now is this between waiving regulations and good progress on some, there's now if we may see a vaccine by September. The big if there is whether a vaccine will against the mutations. I don't think anyone's going to know that until May or June. But I think there's now, we're seeing FDA lift a lot of guidelines, a lot of medicines, a lot of studies. And there's a risk in that you're reducing protocols, but the offside is you need to get something quickly. So I think extent that timeline is brought in, I assume the timeline brought in by the lifting of the extensive testing requirements, and not because the bulk of the time it takes, not that there's that much better progress right now. Mike Lyons, you're asking about November and December. There's actually, if you look, we've been adding a lot of links for media literacy and mullet clips, Mike. And so if you go to mullet clippings, there's a specific question: has the coronavirus been around since November 2019? And I answer that question you asked there. And the short answer is, if it had been, why are we seeing the cases now? And so it's kind of a, it's the ice that the Oxford Study Group is proposing, is it's been around for a lot while. This is pushed even further to November. I think the challenge with that theory is there's a reason we're seeing the surge in cases now, and that all the world is seeing a surge between mid-March, when Italy started to go under, and now there's for that. Maybe it has been around since November, but then we have to figure out a reason of why now these hospital flattening curves and all that are occurring. And I think that's with that question. Yeah, so Greg asked, what about the counting of this with COVID rather than from COVID? So here's a real challenge too. COVID is isolated. It's not like there's a COVID bullet. CSI gets together and they do a thing and they say, death, COVID. COVID causes heart attacks. COVID causes organ. COVID causes a lot of things that if you just took the isolated actual cause of death would be classified under. The question is the context in which those occurred. Did the person have flu-like symptoms? Did they have the walk acts like a duck of COVID? Were they under treatment for COVID? Were they on a ventilator? So I think there's a lot of confusion about this reporting death because COVID allows you to have something that looks like something else. And again, I think at the margins, probably having some underreporting and some overreporting. I think it's a wash in most places, other than where there's a crisis surge. In New York City, they're saying that there may be dozens, if not hundreds of people who are in their homes and apartments come into the hospitals, and that's going to take a long time to work out. That could be a big reporting of death overall, just because they were sort of steered away from the hospitals under fear of the surge. So we won't know for a while on that. Thanks, Rafat. Appreciate it. Any guesses how I got it since I was cautious? No, I was out topping off groceries and all distancing, all the protections, and I got it. That's all I can think of, because the only time I've been out in the last at least 14 days, and that was 10 days ago. I thought I'd be fine if it was over 7 days. My sister improved my thinking and said the reason why you quarantine after you have exposure for 14 days, symptoms can develop a little later. So, can I smell? I've never been able to smell, so that's not really. Did have a loss of appetite today, but I was really stuffing. I was eating a lot earlier, so today lost appetite. No effect to taste or smell, because that's always been gone for me. I can't I wouldn't be a good candidate for that. Thanks, Jerry. Stephen asked, was I tested? No, the testing is limited everywhere. And it's kind of ironic that for as hard as testing is, because of a familial connection with my sister, I have like Dr. Howe's own. Like, she is a diagnostic specialist in infectious diseases. Her entire job is weird. She was on site with the original Hanover outbreak way back in the 90s and has been doing she's one of the top specialists in Alaska that basically covers that. And because Alaska gets a lot of the literacy cases from Russia and other cases from Canada, because Anchorage is the thing, she gets cases. And so I could go and get a test. I could go sit and expose myself to that. But if the infectious disease specialist I happen to says, I mean, it's mild, I'm not going anywhere anyway, the business is not doing, so I'm just going to kind of ride it out, but I'm willing to take. I might have a slight age effect, Celia. I'm actually under 50, but Nikki, good to see you. Susan, good to see you. Sabina, good to see you. The other data point against COVID being around since last fall, this is Lucas, is that its genetic clock isn't indicative of it having been. So this is one of our stellar muleteers who's working on this on the lab side, has a great insight to an earlier question Mike had. This tip of the iceberg theory, and Lucas, you may be able to explain this better, but genetic studies, there's actually timing things you can see how long it's been around or understand how long it's been in an environment and changing. You kind of establish a timeline from the genetic makeup of the virus itself. And if it had been around much longer, that genetic makeup would have been indicative of something that had been around a lot longer. And I can't even begin to get into specifics of that. Maybe Lucas can in the comments, but that's beyond me. John, thus diabetics is... Okay. John is asking, what strategy of mass testing surveillance would you say is the most feasible to work starting to reopen things? So I had been working on an article until I got hit by this, which is how we stand up and from wave one. And it gets to of what's the best way to test? So first of all, I'm assuming we still have privacy laws, which is people don't realize pandemic panopticon that South Korea and Singapore and Taiwan are using, they don't have the same versions of HIPAA. They don't have the same data privacy law of the European Union. This entire privacy movement, and I'm not saying it's a movement, but we have to understand this privacy movement of data privacy for the last 15 years goes squarely in the face of the kind of measures we're seeing in East Asia that have been effective, because what they do is they share with everyone. I mean, they're literally talking in South Korea now of putting a band on your wrist if you have been advised to be and you aren't staying there, and that band will be tracked where it go. So the privacy that are the environment are very different. But what would work with us? So the first thing to understand from serology testing, do people who have infected get antibodies? Are they immune from reinfection? That would allow us to identify by ID badge or something who are safe to go into areas that might to begin doing what I called census sampling. Opinion. I described it on Wednesday as like when you do a political poll, you contact 1,500 people, and from those 1,500 people, you are able to build an entire state's worth of information. You don't have to go to 10 million people, but you go to 1,500 or 2,000. People who have antibodies and are able to go in and do this hot zone testing would be able to go and doing some of this surveillance kind of testing to understand where are the reservoirs, a place where the contagion may still be, and that if we causes a mass reinfection. Can be, as the conditions wane from wave one, that can be buttressed with more systematic sampling testing that doesn't involve people with antibodies. It's more formulaic, it's more institutional. But what you really need to get is some sort of random sampling of different across the country, because these states are happening at different time zones, with the southern states waiting as long as they did. The northern states crest on this. New York may crest on this, say, late May. That may be the high point of a Georgia and Florida outbreak. Well, there's still a road going between Georgia and New York. It's not like the country's, these roads aren't blocked. You tried to block them. There's so much connectivity. And that's a problem in that there is such risk of reinfection from areas that we really need about how we do it. So it needs to be a nationwide program. And this is where the governors and the federal government need to be working together. And I'm not seeing it. I'm seeing state governors take the lead in getting their own procurement, kind of fighting and forth with the president. The president's fighting back and forth with them. I don't see the infrastructure case to take a national approach at surveillance and probabilistic survey, but at the very least, it would involve teams up front who have antibodies going in, switching to something perhaps a little more sophisticated. And I would imagine doing ongoing. So if you think about timing, you want to be sweeping an area probably every 2 week cycles after the end of this. So you're talking at least 6 weeks after this crests to do intensive sampling. So let's say the crest ends on 15th. So you're now into July. You're going to want to build infrastructure that if an outbreak happens in another part of the world, you're able to immediately put in place testing at airports, ports. There's still no testing for citizens coming back, being repatriated from travel where they got stuck abroad and they're now coming back. Hearing reports all the time. No temperature, no testing. You're going to need test facilities at ports of entry. We may, kind of like 9/11, they take your shoes off, TSA. I would not be surprised at all if they're probably overbloated, rather ineffective, but at its core mission, federal, which is the federal testing agency whose job is pandemics. It may be short term, it may fall under the CDC or FEMA, but I think you're going to see a federal structure to do this large effort to equip that structure and bring people in to do this testing, because it's going to at least until we know the vaccine is done, and probably for a year after the vaccine is done, so that we have this pause and breath of comfort that, like, okay, this is now a regular annual thing we can deal with. Yeah, and because Lucas brings up, it's not just test, it's contact tracing. If someone, because I'm now presumptive positive, right? It's not just that if I got a test, that'd be great. You have to find out everyone I've contacted for the last period of time who contacted, and you begin creating this large network of information. And this is why the privacy laws, I would expect our privacy laws to be rapidly changed, if not in the next month with some of these stimulus bills. It may be at least in this HIPAA, a lot of the data privacy, because it's very hard to do the kind of surveillance tracing on a voluntary basis. I mean, I wish you could kind of bring Blockbuster back and just tell Blockbuster that, like, COVID people overdue video to return with late fees, because those guys will track down everything. You cannot get away from Blockbuster, but you really need a kind of overbearing, oppressive sort of tracing system, at least to understand who all contacted. And I say that in the one breath, but know that there's a civil liberties concern on the other hand, that is a prime vehicle for abuse. So that challenge of how do you balance those two, and how does the government if I submit my study, that'll be a whole different study there, Stephen. John, you're answering someone. Yeah, Lucas is talking about a good two-pronged approach. Yeah, I mean, this is going to be a problem. It's testing, it's surveillance, isolation. This is going to be a whole structure we have to build outside of emergency conditions. Right now, we're still in emergency conditions. The wild is coming to us. It's hit us in New York. But that wildfire, as it goes past, we're going to have to move into those areas and out and sort of start returning. I use the analogy of a flood. The sooner you get in a flood, the sooner the drywall out, you can expose the beams, you can start the recovery. If you wait too long, you begin to have real problems. The challenge is it's not just the virus we're recovering from, it's the economic collapse we're recovering from as well. Sinead from Ireland had to give up on contract tracing in the UK due to sheer numbers. Not in Ireland, smaller numbers. Nick, good to see you. Nick is asking, would I advocate a particular strategy to address the data collection privacy concerns? I don't think, so I'm personally here, I'm not speaking from any expertise, but the pandemic approach of South Korea and Singapore, Taiwan, I don't think that's going to work here. I don't think there's enough trust to collect that amount of information with the behavior we've seen in the administration to just say, sure, we'll surrender all these liberties and allow you to trace and track. And I mean, the person who's going to be running this program is most likely going to look a lot like Jared Kushner. And that's going to create a challenge of political credibility. This legitimacy in the state is important because when it comes to emergency measures, you need to have legitimacy and credibility. I'm not saying this is a only phenomenon. If you had reversed this and President Obama said we need to trace every single person to the nth degree, the red folks would be screwed too. So I think we're going to need to find ways of doing don't go to the level of the pandemic panopticon. I don't think we're going to be able to just say all the protections for privacy and surveillance and that, given the state of the United States, given the polarization, given the partisanship for valid reasons, given the distrust, I think it would be fruitful to find innovative ways, second or third options. Like the pandemic panopticon too, remember, it has never been scale. South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan, they were able to control these cases in sub 10,000 numbers, right? They never. It's a real question. I mean, Sinead's talking in the UK. The UK is 50,000 now, Sinead. I don't know if the pandemic panopticon will even scale. Like, we're talking potential millions of people tracing. You're talking a system that's as big as the Social Security Administration database, same investigatory resources as the FBI, and the ability to pass civil liberties as the NSA. I mean, I don't see that. So I think we're going to have to find second and third path alternates, and I don't know what that's. Yeah, Rory's mentioning there will be a lot of voluntary system. I mean, criminy, let's get innovative. Put it as a, what hotter COVID house are you? Or what kind of, coughing do you have? Let's put this on Facebook and get a cute little meme. We'd have tracing like in seconds. I think it could come from the federal government, but if we dress a little bit and hit it as a, what kind of Lord of the Rings character, maybe we get a bunch of people. I don't know. Voluntary will only go so far. Voluntary does not. And voluntary tends to be self-identifying and self-selective. What we really need is surveillance. So it's going to be a real challenge, I think, to get there. John's bringing up the human subject research policy surrounding subject confidentiality and data protection are pretty strong in the U.S. That's what I don't know if I will survive the summer, John. I'm seeing a Act level bill coming down our pipeline that's going to buy our way that is going to be targeting the data protections on behalf of pandemic response. Yeah, voluntary tracking. I mean, voluntary tracking isn't bad, but I think we're going to, that's between voluntary and less than the pandemic panopticon, and this is something that I don't think we have a good answer for. Let me scroll through. It's at the top, and I do want to keep this limited. And I apologize for those who are skipping video. I don't know. It's hopefully the download better. Otherwise, we may do a review of this on Wednesday. Let me go through and check the. By the way, if you haven't yet, port the InfoMullet, become a mulleteer. www.patreon.com/infomullet. It's $5 a month to become a mulleteer. $10 a month to become a senior mulleteer. Appreciate all this support. I don't say that. We have added a bunch of video clips. If you go in the discussion, we now have a media literacy playtest or playlist. We have a mullet clippings. These are much shorter clips, 2 minutes to 5 minutes, that go specific topics that I've taken out, edited, and kind of made condensed. These are designed so if you see someone that says, hey, 80% of are false positive, rather than arguing on Facebook, you can take this clip and put it in there, and it will be a rebuttal or a clarification or an explanation, and we're going to continue doing that. So if you want to support seeing more of that, free to support us. We appreciate it. Looking more questions. Nikki, let's see. I'm just making sure if we have any more questions before. Okay, toilet paper question. It's been a while from toilet paper. Guys, about toilet paper. Guy is my consistent toilet paper guy. I know where you're at, or at least I think I know where you're at in Nevada, and toilet paper chief concern. I have heard good things about other areas of toilet paper. I've heard occasional challenges of I've heard occasional challenges in other areas, but I think you're having a particular issue. I don't know if you're in Vegas, northern or southern Nevada, but in a lot of areas, when toilet paper was taken by the hoarders, they had it for months. You got waves, and those people are now locked in. You may see in a week or two, so you might see a little bit of cyclical effect, but most places I heard about were up as of last week. Let's see here. Okay, John saying read something out of a Germany that was a larger portion of the population was showing antibodies ever tested positive, which may be a promising sign. I mean, I'd have to see the study. I've seen it so many times now. So more to show antibodies if they're has it published as a serology test? I didn't think anything had been formally published yet as a serology test, John. If you could put that in the link, I'll go ahead and check that out. But when we see antibodies that were tested positive, the real question to ask is, did they know they were sick? Did they have symptoms? This gets to this Imperial College study group and the balance between Oxford study group says you would see that like what you're seeing in Germany at a large level, and they wouldn't have had any symptoms. The Imperial College says, yeah, they may have known they were felt sick or bad. They got the antibodies because they were a mild case. The key question is whether the antibodies protect reinfection. And I haven't heard any more reinfections. There's been some anecdotal stories. I haven't seen any good data that says that's a high, which would be huge. I mean, the big three things that determine all of this is, do we get herd immunity from a fast, which be reinfected? Is the virus mutating so fast that the vaccine won't work? And when will we get the vaccine? Those three things trump all other considerations, in my opinion, uninformed. Okay, I'm going to check to see if there's more questions here at the bottom. Okay, Safana. Oh, good to see you, Safana. Hi, Safana. Annie, this is Safana. My comment is the government violates American liberties for security purposes over history and secret. Can't the government do it again? Absolutely, Safana. As a radical moderate, no state has a right to tyranny. That is always a difficult challenge. About a crisis and emergency. There is a valid need for government action in a crisis, but you have to do that with civil liberties, because right alongside crises, overexpansion and and we saw this in 9/11. It had tremendous abuses and a lot of coming out of what was considered security. And as someone who sees terrorism, I can tell you a lot of those security measures are not as effective at stopping terrorism as one might think. But it's easy, quick, and you can get abuses because it's easy and quick, and that's what we got to be on guard for. That's why I'm not sure I'm comfortable with going the endemic panopticon route, even though it seems to work. One is I don't know scale. Two, that's a lot of private data we're giving, and maybe it's not misused by this administration. Let's just say hypothetical. Everyone, pretend. Once it's in the hands of the government, it's not away. We don't know who's going to be president 3 terms now. This is the danger of expanding powers. But in a crisis situation, you have to do a trade-off with public safety. And that is, going back to the founders, that has been a perennial challenge. I'm drinking water, Nikki. Taylor, do you see mandatory vaccination, should the C-19 vaccination be developed, ever being implemented here in the States? It's not. Until there is a constitutional limit, there are too many Remember, the Constitution, the amendments in the Constitution are to restrict the government from doing things. It is not to make things easy for the government. Even in crisis, like the founders were familiar with this. This is the part that people get about constitutional law theory and crisis. The Constitution was formed by people who had just lived through a revolution. They understood crisis, and they were very explicit at what powers the government had in terms of crisis. Now, over time and the natural effect of institutional bureaucracies in a couple hundred years, we have really pushed that definition. But I think absent certain constitutional amendments, there's an implied right to privacy. There's no specific amendment to it, but underlying a lot of amendments is this kind of implied right that if the government can know everything about you, you have no fundamental rights. And that is the tension that's going to come up. A lot of Supreme Court references to it. It comes up a lot in the debate, but that's not exclusively it. And that is going to question. So the constitutional issue is going to be, does the Congress try and push through an amendment that removes privacy by an active amendment, or is there some citizen-based movement that says no, privacy is a constitutional right and now it is explicitly protected? Either one could happen, and I think a lot of it depends on the after effects of this thing. Is this pandemic considered that the primary problem was that we had too many privacy laws, or is the primary one that retrospective that it was a response by the administration? Is it looking like, hey, this was novel, we were unprepared, and someone should have been prepared? we can prepare and mitigate this in the future without surrendering our lives. That narrative, and it's probably going to be segmented by red and blue sides, but that narrative of how we view pandemic historically is probably going to influence which way this constitutional question goes with things like mandatory vaccines in the future. Is muleteer swag. I've been looking at animators and illustrators, Kelly. I've been trying to find some cartoonists who can do a caricature of me and a caricature of Bonky, and we put t-shirts and coffee mugs and all that stuff. I mean, the swag kind of writes itself. It is coming, but it's like you can get some illustrators. You're just stuck with me. Stephen Walker has been grateful in helping suggest ideas for graphic designs, but I want to have find an animator. And if you're on, if you know any illustrators who are looking for some work with some caricature art, drop me a line. And yeah, the jokes kind of write themselves when it's to the the infomullet swag. So I'm going to pause here and see if there's any questions. Again, we've added media literacy clips and muleteer in the YouTube. I'm going to call it here unless there's any more urgent questions because I don't want to be doing this too long. If you want to support the infomullet, check out www.patreon.com/infomullet. $5 a month muleteers, $10 a month for senior muleteers. We appreciate all the support. And if I don't see anything, I'm going to probably call it and wish you all a good night. Be safe, be well, and it'll take me a while to figure out how to turn this off now that I've got, there we go, big red button. So I found the big red. Everyone, take it easy. Have a good night. Bye. Thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to follow the Infomullet, visit us on Facebook or Twitter. And if you'd like notifications when we post new video content, click on the red subscribe button below the video. If you've ever wanted to become a muleteer and support the Infomullet, visit us on Patreon. We appreciate the support.